Every theory we had about Elbaf after chapter 1127 just went out the window with the huge reveal in this week's chapter. Well, technically not every theory. The ones about Prince Loki or some yet to be named giant trapping the crew in their own personal Legoland castle are still very possible, and based on this chapter might actually be correct, though there is still some doubt with that idea. Most notably that when the giant re-enters their room and hears the crew yelling over what to do about the giant animals attacking them, they seem genuinely surprised. But the question is, were they surprised because they had no idea the crew was there to begin with, or by the fact that they managed to escape? That is the main question we have to ask after reading this chapter, because keep in mind, we still don't know exactly how this half of the crew ended up here. Whether they drunkenly sailed their way off to Elbaf alone, this giant just so happened to find them on the shore of the island and placed them inside this makeshift castle, or if after landing on the island, they broke in themselves. Those are the only two options I think are even remotely possible at this point, and there's a lot of signs pointing towards the former, but there's still way too much we don't know to say one way or the other. What we can say for sure though is that where we thought Luffy and the crew were in the last chapter is not actually Elbaf. And honestly, I'm extremely impressed with how well Oda was able to trick all of us. You see, he used our perception of what was happening around the crew to trick us into thinking that we were in the land of giants. Because all we saw were the giant bees, cats, and other animals that they fought, the giant-sized castle they were in, mention of the sun god, the Viking-like clothes they were wearing, and hints towards Norse mythology. Then putting all that together, we thought, oh, we must be on Elbaf. But as it turns out, we were wrong. And instead, where we've been for the last two chapters is basically a sealed-off village made of Legos. Oda took a page from DC Comics and created his own bottled city of Kandor. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, basically Kandor is a city from Superman's home planet of Krypton that before the planet was destroyed, the city along with the people in it were shrunken down and preserved in a bottled container. The origin of how and why this happened varies depending on what era of DC you're reading due to the reboots to their continuity, but the usual suspect is the Superman villain Brainiac, and his reasoning can basically be summed up to, because I wanted to. I mean, it is a little bit more nuanced than that, and huge Superman fans are going to really hate me for explaining it that way, but at the end of the day, that kinda is his main reasoning. Anyway, you know what kills me about the whole reveal in this chapter? Oda put all the clues we need to figure this out right in front of us in the last one. You see, in this chapter, the crew, assuming like us that they're on Elbaf, plan to make their way to the village we saw in 1127 to get info from the giants, but before they can, they run into what I can only describe as a Viking biker, which is probably the coolest version of a biker that you'll ever see in manga. And quick note, as motorcycles obviously don't exist on Elbaf due to the assumed lack of technology on the island, the mysterious biker comes riding in on a giant grasshopper, which is not only dope, but also reminded me of the gag that Sanji is afraid of bugs. It doesn't come up much, so I honestly had forgotten, but it was still really funny to see him back away in fear with Nami once the old guy rides up. Also, on the biker side, you can see the tattoo of what looks like a sun, most likely representing the sun god. Question is it one for the real sun god Nika, or for the pretender that we see at the end of the chapter? And you know what? It could be both. It could be that the sun symbol is meant to represent Nika, but this fake sun god is using it as a symbol meant for them. I mean, if they're already taking the name, why not take everything else tied to the character? Anyway, the point of bringing up the old man was to point out that despite riding a bug the size of Nami, the biker isn't too much larger than the Straw Hats, definitely not giant height, and that's something we all missed from the last chapter. The quote-unquote giants we saw in the beginning reacting to all the chaos Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji were causing weren't that much bigger than the bees we see lying on the ground in front of them. When if they actually were giants, bees to them should be around the same size as bees are to us in real life. Not to mention, when you look at the buildings around them, the people seem to be the correct height they should be in comparison, but so is Nami when we see her in the castle. The hallway, windows, balcony, even the path they walk towards the village, everything seems to be sized proportionally for normal to slightly larger human, when it should be dwarfing them in size the same way we say they are in the fake sun god's room at the end of the chapter. It was literally right there in our faces, but none of us caught on. We were all just so focused on figuring out how they got there, or why Luffy was calling out Gear 4 when he was clearly using Gear 3. Those little mistakes that Oda made in the last chapter helped him sell this misdirection better than anything he intentionally put in. But now we know that Elbaf is in fact not the Lakefield Island that I dreamed of building back when I was 6, but instead the crew was trapped in this weird scale model ant farm for humans, which they find out by Luffy smacking right into the invisible wall, cracking it open, and revealing the strange workshop they're being held in. Now, this only happened because the old biker tried to warn them that if they go down the specific road they were heading towards, it would lead to guardian beasts that would try to eat them if they tried to enter the Sun God's temple, aka the room they're in at the end, which of course Luffy then translated in his head, "Big monster, I want to punch," and took off running straight where he was told not to go. And even though he didn't immediately run alongside him, Zoro, once again sharing a single brain cell with Luffy, decided, oh, I want to fight a giant monster too. Now, two things to take away from this sequence, both that could possibly lead to future trouble with the people who currently live in this Legoland. Number one, the crew, namely Usopp and Nami, destroyed part of the castle when running away from the cat, and as we find out, the old biker is actually in charge of the upkeep of the castle, which he ended up discovering once he got done talking to them that it was already partly destroyed. So once he finds out that it was them, that might cause some issues. And two, when Luffy cracked open the wall, it broke what the villagers thought was their sky. Add those two things onto the list of other chaotic events the Straw Hats have caused in their less than a day time in this place, and the residents are not going to be too happy with them. Though I do guess it depends on whether or not they're there willingly, or if they're under some form of hypnotism placed on them by the fake sun god, and are being held against their will as her little playthings. And speaking of being held against their will, I have good news. We have finally found Chopper. As you know, this cute little guy was missing in the last chapter. Turns out the fake sun god had him chained up on a table outside of the Legoland, right next to what looks like a sewing machine. And of course, like any kid, he was scared out of his mind, having woken up in a strange place alone, none of his friends in sight, with a strange collar around his neck holding him in place. Now, the fan translation says it was a steel collar, but I feel like that's something that Chopper would have been able to break. So I'm guessing that when we get the official translation on Sunday, that more than likely it's going to say it was a sea stone collar. Or maybe it's implying that if he had transformed into one of his forms that would have been able to break the collar, then it would have choked him out and he would have died. I don't know. Either way, it sounds like he went through some traumatic events while they were having fun inside the Lego Island, and he's in need of some comfort, which of course Nami is more than happy to provide for a price. Which Usopp quickly calls her out on, saying she should sympathize with him considering how scared out of her mind she was just moments ago, which, I mean, yeah, he's kind of right. But then again, she wouldn't be Nami if she didn't use this opportunity to scam some money out of her friends. Anyway, as they're deciding what their next course of action is, they get attacked by the guardians the old biker warned them about, which consists of a snake, a crow, and 3 mice. Or are they rats? Because they definitely look more like rats to me than mice, but I think the translation calls them mice, I'll have to double check. Anyway, Luffy immediately jumps in to fight them, going gear 5, though I doubt he really needed to go that far to beat them. Kinda seems like ever since he unlocked it, he's developed a tendency to jump straight to that form no matter how strong or weak his opponent is. I mean, I get using it against Lucci when the two of them met up on Egghead. That was an opponent that he barely beat the last time, he wants to dominate him this time. Makes sense. And it definitely made sense using it against all the other threats he fought on Egghead. But this situation right here, where he's fighting 3 to 4 animals, not sure that warranted. Anyway, all this happens just as the fake sun god is approaching the room, and she immediately enters to see what all the commotion is about. I say she because based on her footwear, it would imply that the giant is female, though until the mask comes off, we can't say for sure one way or the other. But I think it is a safe bet to say that this is in fact not Prince Loki, given the huge difference in their design from his silhouette. But it's not as though Oda hasn't presented a silhouette of a character before, and then when they were finally introduced, their design had completely changed. So again, anything's possible at this point until the mask comes off. And speaking of the mask, it was pointed out on Twitter by multiple readers that the mask she is wearing is the exact same one as one of the 3 God's Knights we saw in Kuma's God Valley flashback. Which, dude, this just opens up so many more questions. Starting with, is this the same person from that event? And if it is, how did she become a giant? Because she definitely wasn't one before. And if she's not a giant, then what the hell really happened to Luffy and the crew? That last one being the easiest to answer, she has a devil fruit akin to Sugar's that allows her to shrink people down to the size of toys and hypnotize them. My best guess is that every now and then people either wash up or land on the shore of Elbaf. The sun god kidnaps them before they can reach the giant and brings them to her playroom where she can watch them from behind the glass like they're a hamster in its cage. That honestly fits if she is a former God's Knight and Celestial Dragon. They're used to being treated as gods and using people for their entertainment, so kidnapping people, trapping them in fake Elbaf, and having them revere her as God is kind of par for the course. And if that's what she did to this half of the crew, then I guess the reason why the hypnotism part didn't work on the Straw Hats is because they were all extremely drunk at the time. So once they sobered up, they all broke the spell. Of course, this is all just guesswork. All we know for sure is that in the next chapter, we'll see her chasing down the Straw Hats through Waco Land as they ride the giant cat they fought before to safety because it came back for revenge but was quickly made into their mode of transportation. Yet another reason why the citizens of the fake village could potentially turn against them, considering the more domesticated animals from the castle are seen as important to them. They won't take too kindly to the crew using it as a discount horse. Oh, and of course their sun god actively trying to capture D6. So them seeing Luffy in Gear 5 and that being what draws them into seeing that their sun god is actually fake probably won't happen, and we'll have to find a new way to break her control over them. Honestly, at this point, it's almost impossible to predict exactly what Oda is going to pull out next on this Elbaf adventure, but with each and every chapter, I am getting more and more excited, and if you feel the same way, please let me know in the comments down below.